Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. Today I am with Jeremy Abrahamson from X, and we're going to be talking about a lot of different subjects from writing, liturgy, the mind of a writer, a lot of cool subjects and topics. So if you're a guy who likes to write and read books, this is going to be a interesting episode. Hope you guys enjoy it. Don't forget to give this episode a thumbs up if you like it. Don't forget to follow on YouTube or Spotify, wherever you guys are listening. I really appreciate that to help the channel grow. And so without further ado, welcome back to another episode of Lift High the Cross podcast. So to start off, please introduce yourself to my audience. Obviously, a lot of people from X know who you are, but all the people that are listening on Spotify, YouTube, please introduce yourself, and then we'll get this show on the road.
All right. Well, my name is Jeremy Abrahamson. I'm a confessional Lutheran from the Midwest. I wouldn't say professional author or not. I actually work in food, but I would call myself a writer, as in I do the writing because I like to write. And then if I make money out of it, that's a bonus. As you can tell by that philosophy on work in general, I am German, but... or at least culturally speaking. But I saw a real lack of any sort of attempts, I guess, in mainstream Christian culture to do anything approaching proper literature, because everybody seemed to want to follow the evangelical mold. And that was something that just didn't sit right with me, because it didn't deal with law gospel properly, and it also wasn't very good. So while I did not, I wouldn't necessarily say mine's not necessarily good either. It's a first attempt. I was able to get my first novel published last January, which is where people who are fans of Remy have probably heard of me, called 8 Witch Hunters. And so I reached out to Ray a week ago to see if he was able to work me in, because he was looking for slots, and being the gracious man he is, I was given a shot. So hopefully I won't mess him up.
We'll see how gracious I am after this turns out.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you about, I look at Christian liturgy, and you're totally right. It's more into the evangelical side, because I would say it's a lot easier in that area when most of your fan base or more people that want to look into your writings are based on emotion and not really on high reasoning or high literature. That's kind of where your majority of people are going to be, or at least people that are going to be trying to write those things. And I would say, if we had to go even further, I would say the next best thing to like Christian liturgy or Christian writings would be the Reformed people, because they do a pretty good job. I would say from like even tie with evangelicals, Catholics, because they write a lot of stuff, and then probably like Presbyterian, Reformed guys. But yeah, there's not a lot of Lutherans that are willing to do a lot of writing. And I guess besides like top tier guys, I mean, there's not a lot of people that, besides the theology stuff, not a lot of writings as well. So it's good to see a fellow novelist trying to write something for the Lutheran kingdom. That's great to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. A correct phrase of saying it wouldn't be that I'm trying to write for the kingdom. It's more to say that I'm writing, and it would be incorrect of me to not depict myself according to my beliefs.
Right.
Because I mean, that's the whole evangelical thing, is you got to write with an agenda. The goal is to convert, and I can't do that. That's not how the gospel works. The gospel is going to convert because the Holy Spirit's in it, not because I'm a good writer, right?
Yeah. When you were on Lutheran Answers, he asked the question about, which I want to ask you again, kind of go into that a little bit. You guys were talking about if you ever get the need to want to write your novels, and you're writing through it, and you're wanting to put in your own Lutheran spin to it, you ever get the need of wanting to do that? Because I'd say when it comes to the writing part of, if you're writing a novel or a nonfiction book, it can be very easy to putting your own beliefs and own theology into it. And I would say when it comes to like what I've read throughout my years or through high school and like the books, I came from a homeschool program that was an evangelical Christian community, which it was great. It was better than public school, but a lot of the books that they would pick, it would really be involved to a lot of their evangelical beliefs. And do you ever get the desire to want to plant, I would say, just simply plant Lutheranism into your books? Because that's not, I would say for me, because I'm not a professional writer myself, but that would be difficult to do for me at least. But do you ever get the itch to do that?
Well, it would. I mean, anybody who knows my belief system is going to pick this up and know exactly where I stand on like abortion. It's not going to be something that comes across with that, or let me phrase it that way. It's not going to be something that escapes notice completely. But at the same time, I would say because the gospel is the gospel, because it works how it works. To me, it's more. I grew up. I was a fan of stuff like Morrowind and Planescape Torment and others games like that had the cultures and the settings had a lot very heavy religious elements to them, and those religions are just total hokum. But I loved the idea of just getting into the cultures, getting into the settings where these people had these practices, these rituals, these beliefs. And so what I like to read already has that aspect. For me, it was less a case of writing for the sake of proselytizing and more a case of keeping that atmosphere, but just making sure I didn't preach heresy in the process.
That's what I really longed for in my high school years, because when you're homeschooled and you come from a Christian community, you don't really have a lot of you have a lot of human interaction. Just I would say not nearly enough to help you socially, and then also prepare for things like college or when you get out of high school in general. And what I would really find out is that the best way for me to become more intellectual in the sense of being able to communicate and talk to people, it would come through the books I was reading. And so being able to look into culture, being able to look into people's lives by looking through history looking at different cultures and looking at different stories and fantasies and seeing how people interact with each other, I would even read movie scripts. There was a point where I didn't even want to read any books because I didn't really have the attention span for it. So I would just be reading scripts from movies that I've watched, and then I would start reading scripts from movies I haven't even watched, because I guess my dopamine would rush more because I like the idea of that. But sooner I would realize that 90% of movies or shows that are written, they're based off novels or books. And so that would make me go to those books as well and see the different things that are going on, which just shows the importance of just reading through your daily life. The more I keep reading, the more aware I become from not just the information that I learn, but also just socially in my life.
Right. No, that's very good that you did kind of grow that. That's I was lucky. I was also like yourself. I was also homeschooled for most of my early years. But in my case, one of the luxuries I had was my dad who is a genius. I am not. But he would take the time to sit down, read with his kids daily, just great literature, classics of all kinds. Most heavily Tolkien, and part of that was his personal fandom, but also it was a common request. We got through a lot of stuff to the point where by the time we were in middle school age, getting into stuff like Shakespeare we didn't have the difficulty curve that a lot of kids do getting into the classical works, because we were already used to all of the ideas, because Dad would sit there and talk. So what do you think the author meant by this? What do you think his intentions were? What was the goal of this story? Why were these characters doing this? And that was a aspect, a benefit that we were able to grab a hold of, at least in the older kids in our family. And it wasn't something that I mean, it's not something you can take for granted. It's not something that comes of ourselves. It's God gave us good guidance in this area. I mean, I'm not to throw my mom under the bus too. We got lots of Jane Austen in that, and I thoroughly recommend men to read Jane Austen. I know it's one that a lot of men who are not huge literature geeks might put on the back burner because it's romance novels, but you really should dive into those.
Yeah. What always cracks me up is that there's a lot of movies that are a lot of like, either if they're the antagonist or the secondary character that just doesn't understand the protagonist. The majority of those times they don't like reading. And I guess that's also that has to do a lot with like medieval days or more ancient times where men just didn't have time to read, or they didn't really see the importance of doing it with more of the men that are working through their communities, working through the households. But or at least if it's just because of the big swing of things in the last 50 or 150 years, and just how opposite that is, because just the efficiency of reading and how important that is and how much that builds your mind, and how in the last 500 years, and how most of for you to develop is reading throughout either your different curriculum or different what you're learning in school. It all goes upon what you're reading and how disciplined you make yourself reading. I would say I haven't really disciplined myself to read a lot of high things like Shakespeare until the later years of my high school years, because I didn't really put myself doing it. My co-op didn't mess around. We were reading Shakespeare like in my sophomore year, and I was always trying to keep up with a lot of difference of his readings. I mean, I was reading Hamilton in my like second or third year, and I was trying really hard to keep up with it, and I just didn't really have the discipline to do it. And now I'm reading through it again, and I'm like, man, I was missing out a lot of that. And more down the road, I mean, you have kids especially kids in my generation, but then that were first introduced by the iPhone, and now our attention span is just not there anymore. And now you look into the kids that after my generation, and it's even worse. And you have all these problems. It could be just the parents that are just not letting them be disciplined enough with looking at screens, or their attention span, or being disciplined enough. But I'd say a lot of that has to do is that they're not reading. You just give them a small chapter book of bedtime stories, and they have a hard time reading it because they're not watching a video on YouTube. It's pretty interesting kind of seeing the downfall of mankind with just pure literature. I mean, I'm sure all the kids from a long time ago would be way more intelligent when it just comes to reading, because they were just trained to read things like Shakespeare. And that's something I'm still working on. I'm trying to get better at just taking like a letter from Luther and just trying to understand all of it. I'm usually a very technical guy, so I like to read through each page. I like to go through each sentence again and make notes of it. So it takes me a little bit more time to develop. That's how I always have been, like with my math, with my studies, with my history. I'm just trying really hard to get to that point where you're able to just take that much information and just store it in your brain as fast as you can, like most people were able to back then.
Well, and that's the thing. This is something that I think a lot of people who grow up with the public school impression of times past kind of miss, is you get this impression of, like you said, a lot of people not having time. They have their work, they have their duties and stuff. And that's true, but it wasn't as if people couldn't read. Like at the time of Luther, one of the reasons he needed to translate the Bible into German at the time of the printing press is because there was already a healthy audience who could read German. It would have served him no purpose if he wasn't trying to do that. It was a language which had a standardized way of writing. It was adapted to the Latin alphabet. The problem is that the Bible wasn't available in that language. It wasn't that the entire Western world was totally illiterate in a sense, in the modern sense, or they couldn't read at all. It's the fact that they didn't have access to liturgical languages. They didn't have access to the church teachings. And that's the records we have, and that's why they're perceived as backwards. And Luther was trying to bridge that gap by making sure that these people who already had the skills, they already had in a lot of places the culture. You couldn't run a business in Europe in the 16th century if you couldn't read one or two different languages. But the problem is those languages didn't necessarily, the language we see now as German was 16 or 17 different languages back then. You didn't need probably many of them still under the title of German, but if you go from the Black Forest up to Saxony, your dialect is so different as to be, a completely new vocabulary. And that was the gap he was trying to bridge, is these people needed to be connected to. And I think that I mean, despite my Augustinianism, I like to have a little more faith in the next generation. Is not that they can't read or not that they won't read. It's that no one's writing, right? It's that the people gave up before the lesson started. They're trying to sell books to people instead of writing books that are worth those people reaching out. I see a lot of people trying to determine how to, and you see this, the LCMS, to its credit, I look at you guys from outside, you're like, I'm ELS, but you guys have done a lot of really good work in the last couple of years trying to bring back the traditional wording for the liturgy, which is a battle a lot of other Christian synods are still trying to undo the trends of the previous century in this regard. We're trying to, you still get this pattern of people saying, hey, you gotta speak to, or you gotta change the language, you gotta modernize the language, the music, everything like that. But that's treating people like they're stupid, and they're not. I mean, we are stupid in a lot of ways, but not in the sense that we can't adapt. And the one thing I've noticed a lot with the LCMS is there is this trend now to shift back towards a classical understanding of how knowledge and wisdom and even English works. We're trying to draw people to something that is already great instead of changing the great thing to appeal to them. And that's kind of what I wanted to do. Kind of the same way I see literature is the reason nobody reads stuff like Tolkien, who write like Tolkien anymore, is because Tolkien was already weird when he wrote it. He was the one who was writing with the ambition of people from a previous time being able to connecting to the language of a previous time. And that's kind of what I want. I have no education whatsoever. So like I'm utterly unqualified, but the fact is that no one else was doing it. So I was like, well, what am I just to do? Just give up. And I hope that people who are much smarter than me, much more educated than me, can see this as kind of a wake-up call that a guy with no college experience whatsoever can publish something that is written in a form that in an archaic form, and say, hey, I can do this too, and I can do this better, and I'm sure you can, and I want you to. That's kind of my desire, because I'd rather read than write. And more people who are smarter than me and more faithful Christians who are smarter than me doing stuff like this gives me more stuff to consume.
Yeah. What I find difficult with writing is, well, when I first think of trying to write anything in general, it's very difficult to be original. I'd say that's not just because of someone finds it difficult to do it because they're not trained to or they're not used to, but when I am brainstorming, I find it very difficult to be original with what I'm writing, because I first think of, you can't really rewrite Shakespeare. Shakespeare already has written Shakespeare. And you look even farther. I mean, even if you look at ancient writings that are showing every single writing in American history it's rooted to, I mean, you even look at the Bible, which is like basically 100% of all stories that have developed over time is rooted into stories of the Bible. I've been working on a story to write someday, and I was telling my friend about it, and to make it short, it's about a German pastor going to more like this a 1700s community in America, and he's becoming the pastor, and he's seeing all the wrong ways that are going over there, and I want him to try to make the town better, even though there's plenty of people that are wanting to put a stop to him. And I was telling my friend about this, and he was like, "Oh, so you're gonna base it off the book of Jeremiah?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And like, "Well, it's basically just the story of Jeremiah." And I was like, "Oh, you're right. It's just, I just ripped off the book of Jeremiah from the Bible," and which is not a bad thing, but I think that's what also makes people not motivated to write, because it just feels like everything has been written already.
Well, and that's a fear, I think, that's propagated by media, because here's the thing, that, and this is a little cheat that every good author knows, and this is the only, I think, as of his later years, this is the only good thing Pablo Picasso ever did after he lost his artistic talent, turned to Cubism, is great artists steal. This idea of originality, this idea of trying to set yourself apart is, I think it's arrogance. I think it's vanity, as Ecclesiastes would quip. I don't believe that there should be a motivation to be original. I'm not saying don't worry about whether original or not. I think the entire ambition of originality, my ambition when I write, is to whole cloth plagiarize better authors in the best possible way so that they all fit together and convey ideas that I have from 500 years ago. That is what I desire, is to mix and match things I like into a new idea that is, it's not a new idea at all. It's a new telling of ideas that have been told 1,000 times. So let me here, I'm kind of out of order on my script here. Let me kind of dial this in for a way of saying this, is the classic human form is the tragedy. And that's where we were talking about Shakespeare and Macbeth. Macbeth in particular is one of my favorites. Hamlet's obviously something anybody who comes from a Reformed generation should study because of how thoroughly it deals with it. But the idea of man has a talent, man embraces that talent and his calling, man works really hard, gets really strong, and then everything falls apart because of the thing that gave the man the talent in the first place, because of his over-reliance on something, some element that got him out the door. The fall was always there right from the beginning. Macbeth goes and kills Macbeth, a wise, noble, and heroic man and a great leader, betrays his friend for power, and then that winds up coming back and eating him, because people lose their trust in a man who, by all accounts, otherwise would have been trustworthy. And this is the reason the tragedy works, is because it is the human form. That is what we achieve, is that everything we do comes down to we all fall short. And then the greatest story, the story God was trying to set us up for right at the beginning, the subverted tragedy, as Tolkien called it, the eucatastrophe, is all of those things that destroy you all of a sudden come to fruition in a good thing, in a way that you could not have possibly seen or aimed for by your own hands, but it was just as unavoidable as your own downfall. And the good, the miraculous, the valuable comes out of your failure because of your failure, and you would not have been able to plan for it in any possible way. And that is what Tolkien especially studied this very heavily. But this is something authors have known, where we get the phrase the Deus ex machina is in Greek tragedy. You'd have the god would descend out of Olympus at the end of the play to resolve the story for the characters who had failed, and that because hubris was such a big theme in Greek writing. And in Christian tradition, one of the things we have to embrace is, I think we should be embracing, is because of original sin, every one of us lives the tragedy every day, both on the small scale and the large scale. It always comes around to bite us, and then we don't appreciate all the little ways in which things work out, because we assume the workout, we put the work out because it came from something we did. We assume it's something we planned instead of something that happened in spite of our plans, that God engineered through us instead of something that we worked for. And that is something that, for me, when I'm writing, like I was saying, as far as originality, everything I will ever write is going to be a tragedy of some kind. And at many of those things, I'm going to try to write in a eucatastrophic way, where you get the good that comes out of it was inevitable, just as inevitable as the failure. But I have no desire whatsoever to be original. That would completely derail what I would want. That would be disruptive to the stories that I think are worth telling. And that is something that I think that a lot of people get caught up in elements of critique and impulse, and they're saying, well, other people get criticized for not being original, so I have to be original, instead of saying, why does that matter? I mean, look at the biggest, most successful series of the last decade, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They just made the movie same movie 20 times, and people loved it. I don't understand why I don't understand loving that movie that much to go back and see the same film 20 times in a row. But I do understand why people loved it, because they're just watching the classic, good triumphs over evil story over and over again.
Nostalgia. Yeah.
Yeah, nostalgia, yeah. But like everything people complain about with the new movies, that ever since they changed the generation, changed the guard, all of these flaws were there right from the beginning. It's just that people cared more about the other generation. And even if things are getting worse, a big factor of them getting worse is just the flaws stacking on top of each other. It's not because those flaws never were part of it, or they're whole cloth original to the new generation. It's audiences are not scared of unoriginality. Only people who try to be, hold themselves to a different standard. And I think the standard is a vain and idolatrous standard, frankly speaking, to worry about something like that, because God already told everything that could be told before we got out of Genesis 3.
I always find it funny when just like from not only from where you get your originality from different people that you write, but I always find it funny when you hear someone talk, or you know someone for a long time, you kind of know what kind of books or writings they like to listen to. When I'm always talking to my cousin who's Presbyterian, every time I hear him talk about the law or how he puts his philosophy, I'm out loud. I always call him out for being such a Calvinist, because he sounds like he just reads John Calvin. Similar to me when I'm more chill when there's problems and situations, and he always calls me out for being a Luther boy, being able to cop out on stuff like that I don't understand, which is funny, because you can, a lot of times when you see people that write their books or their articles or where they're getting their reasoning, you can kind of tell who they're rooted to, which is either great philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, or you look at theologians like Luther, Calvin, or you look at the church fathers. It's all there. And with that being said, I'd say there's also a lot of people that that also comes with kind of a battle as well. I mean, you could still see that today. Everyone's on their Tolkien side. Everyone's on their Book of Narnia and C.S. Lewis side. That's also the next question I wanted to ask you. Are you more of a Tolkien guy or a C.S. Lewis guy?
For what?
I would say just their books.
In what regard?
Just in their books in general, because I mean, we could go into their theology, but also I think that's kind of the biggest question everyone's asking, like who's better, Tolkien-wise, Lord of the Rings, C.S. Lewis, Book of Narnia. What do you think?
Here's the thing. Tolkien was wrong rather consistently in his perception of the values of his own work and the values of other people's works. Tolkien was inarguably one of the greatest authors in human history, certainly in the English language. And for me, he is inarguably my favorite author ever. But I think that the rivalry that people elevate is incorrect, because they take Tolkien's writings of descriptions of C.S. Lewis's writings, take those at face value. But here's the thing is, Tolkien, for all of his philosophical ponderings and thought, that was not an area he was very good at. It was not it was an area he was good in, he was a good Catholic. He had a good understanding of Catholic theology and philosophy, and his books he was genius. And so his writings were consistent with properly understanding these things and reasoning through them. But famously, one of the ideas that gets brought up all the time is his study of allegory, like his critique, his justified critique on people calling Lord of the Rings allegory. And people will point out, well, C.S. Lewis was the allegory. But when you pick up, and I talked about this with Remy, if you pick up Narnia without a theological background, maybe you could say, oh, this is just retelling scripture. If you pick up Narnia from a theological background, it is not allegorical in any way. It is literally just a theological treatise in the form of a children's story. It's not symbolism at all. It's all of the symbolism in Narnia is just biblical terminology, like impersonified. The Lion of the tribe of Judah is the central character of the Narnia saga. There is the symbolism there, and none of it is symbolism he invented, and none of it is symbolism for the sake of making the story easier in a way that hadn't been done. He assumed people were going to understand this. This is not allegory. This is him saying, I'm just going to try to figure out how this all fits together. That's a theological treatise. And that is something Lewis has always been far, far more talented than Tolkien in understanding, is the philosophical side and the way this reaches out to human hearts. It is unfair I can say I prefer Tolkien as a writer because he's a much bigger part of my life, childhood, and I love his understanding of language. And because his theology is usually sound, aside from his bit of semi-Pelagianism some at times, though not nearly as semi-Pelagian as the Jackson films made him out to be, like Jackson's straight up Erasmusian. It's to use a meme that's been going around for this last week is the resurgence of the old Tolkien versus Herbert debate, to Frank Herbert, the author of Dune, because Herbert wrote in the style of a modernist and was an agnostic for much of his life. I believe he became a deist near the end of it because later on his books started to reflect that, but I don't know what extent he's gone. So maybe I'll get a chance to ask him someday. I assume not. God willing, I will. But there's no point in pitting Tolkien and Herbert against each other, despite Tolkien's personal distaste for Herbert, because really they're just writing reflections where the other person's they complete each other, and the same is true of Tolkien and Lewis, and the same is true of to say. It's like taking Victor Hugo and Alexander Dumas. Alexander Dumas loves the king. Victor Hugo treats him with skepticism. Alexander Dumas writes full of energy and passion, and Hugo is world weary. That doesn't mean they're actually enemies. If you read through their stuff, they're actually telling the same story very often. They just have different perceptions of how the world works and are writing from those perceptions, but they're not enemies the way to use somebody who tries, and I think actually he fails to be an enemy, but he tries to be an enemy, would be Philip Pullman, the Golden Compass for the evangelical crowd, those devil books of the 90s that your parents told you weren't allowed to read before Harry Potter came out. If your mom told you about the second one, you do read Harry Potter. Your mom didn't know what she was talking about. Philip Pullman, she might have been right. But even then, I think he failed. His books were written for the point of enmity with these greater authors, to be subversive. And that's something that if you're just trying to reflect the truth with no malice towards authors who came before, you're going to be just telling the same thing over and over again. And based on your strengths, you're going to achieve some things that authors didn't. And so for me, the C.S. Lewis versus Tolkien is Personally, I'm Tolkienian in my preference, but I want to say this only by the extent that it is a Christian who abandons C.S. Lewis because Tolkien is a better storyteller is doing Tolkien a disservice. C.S. Lewis is inarguably just as also a genius and just has a slightly different set of priorities. And it's also, and do not take Tolkien's accusations of allegory seriously, because Tolkien frankly didn't know what he was talking about in this regard. That's not what C.S. Lewis writes.
Right. Yeah, that's what always makes me difficult from taking Tolkien over or C.S. Lewis. We're on the 35-minute mark. Do you want to start talking about your book and what you're working on right now?
Sure thing. So in this case, 8 Witch Hunters, this is the thing I wrote. It is something I wrote in a month, intended to be, I kind of was daring myself because I thought I had a system that would work. And in the end, what I got was something that was about a third of the story I had originally planned to tell, but it was super episodic, so I thought it would be fine to break it up. Like it is any one of these, any of this, if God gives me the ability to write more of it, you can break it off in chunks, and none of this stuff will fully rely on any of the other aspects. But because classic form is episodic, and I want to appeal to that. So in this case, what I would call it is it's a Western, a fairy tale Western, like a Western like the genre, but it's written in the early Middle Ages in like rural Byzantinia. It would be, so your technology or limitations are the limitations of the late Roman Empire, not of the early American one. It's written in the format of a Western, and excuse me, the reason is because I think that is the English languages, specifically American English, which is the language I speak, that is our great mythic form, is the Western. And if I'm going to write it anyway, or write something that is intended to capture that, I should use that form. In this case, it is a fairy tale, because I grew up with a lot of Grimms as well. So it's very, very classical, and it's fairy tale style too. The idea is you got a bunch of knights who work for the church, essentially glorified hitmen, whose job it is to hunt certain types of things. And in this case, they're hunting witches. And the reason I chose witches in particular is in their form as a motif in storytelling. The witch serves as the symbol throughout literary history as sort of the abuse of maternal trust. It is the creature who cannot have children of her own, or when they are monsters. And so she steals those from others. She is the usurper. Sometimes she would eat the children. Sometimes she would curse the children. She was the mockery of the maternal. And I say this because the mother is such a beautiful thing. And that's why understanding what the mockery is important. And for those of us today, there's a lot of themes that understanding what the mockery of motherhood is very, like, cultures understood the idea of stealing somebody else's children for your own. They understood the idea of the abuse of children. It was not something that's unique to our culture. It was not something that was poorly understood. And they understood what would happen if you abuse children. And so that's where the witch archetype comes from, is these mediums, these spirit walkers, who would be these women who would appeal to these occult beliefs and use them to trick others. And people recognize this. Not every culture requires the belief in the supernatural to believe that the people who are looking for the supernatural are the bad guys. And that's why that motif has echoed throughout years. And so my thought was, you write a Western where these guys' job is just to hunt down these women who are betraying the role of a woman in society. They're actively harming the purpose of what a woman does for the sake of personal gain. And in this case, because it's a fantasy story where magic works, you have to have specialized people to fix this problem because you can't do it on your own. You can't just say, hey, each to their own. I'm just going to, argue in a liberal way that these people are not 100% trustworthy. You need people who can deal with magic. And in one of the things I really want to target is the recognition that the sort of people whose job it is to deal with this problem are not necessarily good people. In fact, I would say in this particular case, a lot of them are the sort of people who take the option as a way out of some sort of criminal punishment. Hey, I'm going to be executed. Now I can serve the church. And that's something that some of them are going to be faithful in that promise. Some of them are not. And while I'm not going to necessarily say that you should pick up this book and expect this to be a deep exploration of how people stand and fall in its individual nature, I do want at least the story I'm telling to recognize that reality, that people are not going to keep their promises. And yet society without those people who are making the promises in the first place is still a worse place. So that's kind of where I was going so far with the central story, is the recognition of the cruelty of the world and the importance of, despite our own evil in our hearts, our own evil motivation, selfishness, standing against it anyway.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Were you finishing?
Oh, yeah. Making sure that the question of whether we have the moral high ground is irrelevant, because we can't. It's still our job to fight against stuff that we could never be, to fight against stuff we can't be better than, just because it needs to be fought against anyway.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I love the idea of your story being in a Western, because I'm a huge fan of Westerns. I'm a big fan of Clint Eastwood and Kurt Russell, and just the idea of that time period and how everything was just in high stakes. Everyone had to be on their guard because you have no idea what's going to happen. That's kind of what motivated me to start writing my story, because I love the idea of that time period. When you look at guys like Val Kilmer and Kurt Russell in Tombstone, and how great buds they were, and how they were able to pick up anything and take out anybody, and how just so intimidating and crucial and killer those guys were, which isn't the greatest protagonists in the world. I mean, they're not great guys. I mean, most of the time Clint Eastwood's characters aren't necessarily the hero of a story. He's kind of the solid definition of an anti-hero, and that's what I like to see those characters, because they're very interesting, because sometimes they're doing decisions for themselves, sometimes they're doing decisions for the good of the people, and you can do a lot with that, with those character arcs. And that's kind of what motivated me to do some kind of story in the Western time period, with something like a Lutheran pastor going into a rugged area like that, because I think you like a lot like Christian writers of either movies or novels. I think you can do a lot with that in that time period, with all the evil and all the corruption that was going on, with all the stuff you can get away with during that time. There's a lot to expand on that, because I mean, there's a lot of similarities of the times of the Israelites when they were marrying foreign women and they were worshiping terrible idols, and all these prophets, they had to come over here and somewhat try to fix all of these problems with God's help. And there's a lot of things that go wrong, and the people are always rebelling against them. And that's also kind of going back to the root of all stories, which is the Bible, and how you can reflect on a lot of these stories from, you could do it in a lot of different time periods, but that's why I like that specific time in America, because everything was kind of on the line. Everything was very intimidating and scary. And also it wasn't exactly the safest place in the world as well, because you could get sick and die just like that. You can run into a bunch of people that can shoot you up and they can get away with it. So there's a lot to go on. I would say it's kind of the modern way of looking at a lot of things that was going on during the Bible times, because there's a lot of bad people. There's a lot of sickness that was going on. That's probably the closest of time period we can see that was very similar to the biblical area.
What's your thoughts on Cormac McCarthy?
Could you remind me what he is?
The most well-known story, most popular story to comment on in the last couple of years is called Blood Meridian, which is the one I'll be talking about in a second. The one you're probably most familiar with is No Country for Old Men, because of the excellent film from 2009.
The Coen brothers, yeah.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, that's just curious. Like, knowing with him that is recommended. What are your thoughts on him thus far, or do you have the exposure?
I find those stories pretty interesting. With how, not just from mostly, I mean, their time periods are pretty good on those different stories from their novels and the movies. But really, what I like to focus on is how evil their characters are, specifically from No Country for Old Men, because Sugar, that's his name, Sugar. He does a real, especially the actor does a fantastic job representing him from that book and showing just how he was more than just a bad guy. He was a psychopath, and being able to walk around and base off those characters and just the story of the guy just running for his life from this guy, because this guy, even though he gets his money, he's going after this guy one way or of another, which I really like as a person that likes listening to stories. That's kind of my favorite part, which is looking at the characters and what the writer does with them. I mean, it could be a story about a guy that's going to the moon, and there's a bunch of characters that are just talking to each other down the radio, and they're going from one place to another. Or it could be a story about kind of like 8 Hateful Men, how there's 5 to 8 guys just in a room, and they're just talking to each other for the majority of the movie. I can find that super entertaining for how the conversations are going and how you're able to make these very unique characters bounce off each other. That's kind of my favorite thing looking into any kind of story, because they're just so extremely good at making those characters bounce off each other. That's kind of what I look into movies now. I don't really I like looking at the story. I like looking at the plot, but mostly I love the characters and how they drive the story and how they keep it going.
Sorry, my roommate came out and I wanted him to know this live, just so would be heads up. I figured that would behoove him.
Oh, you're fine.
No, and that's, like you said, the characterization. And that is something that the book in this case that I was going to bring up was in Blood Meridian, which is the book that's currently his most popular, and it's often regarded. It's from the 80s. It's often regarded as his great work. I don't have a personal opinion on whether it's his great work yet, but it is the one I most recently finished. So, I mean, there's that. One of the critical themes is the civilization, is that turn of the cusp. It's actually set prior to the era we would call the Western. It's set before the Civil Wars, but it's set in a part that is not civilized. And kind of a theme about it is you have the natives killing other natives, you have white men killing other white men, you have black men killing white men killing black men, all over the place. This uncharitable but uncritical look at human violence. And one of the principal ideas, there's a quote in the book, before there was man, war found him, where there's a character who full-heartedly believes, or at least claims to full-heartedly believe in a very convincing way. It's left ambiguous what sort of things he believes at all. But this idea of the sinful nature of man being so native, and that's one of the appeals of the Western to us. It's the realization that the thing we portray as this wild badland era is actually the default state of the entire world, even right now. And America was the place where we managed to overcome that for a spell. Now, the Christian says this is in spite of us. But the American passion wants to take pride in this, say, we were the ones who triumphed over that. We built Camelot on the bones of the wasteland. And regardless of who you credit for it, the reality is that Camelot was built for now. And I think that that is one of the great appeal of the Western to the American, is that recognition that we got something that the entire rest of the history didn't get. We built the Roman Empire on a wasteland. And that is something that is alien to human history, unique. American is not exceptional because we are better. We're exceptional because it is impossible to conceive that this idea could even happen. Like history tells us that every revolution ends in failure. History tells us that every ambition of freedom always is usurped. History tells us that there is this endless, constant self-destruction where the only society that happens is in spite of human nature. And then in the case of America, whether it is in spite of human nature or not, we went into a place whose nature was man-killing nature, and then we built a place that was relatively okay to live. And that kind of beauty of that victory is why the Western is so appealing to us, I think. We have these knights in shining armor. We have the Camelot. The Arthurian mythos is the American mythos. The Lancelot and Bedivere going out and conquering the giants. And because they do that sort of thing, these knights go out and pose these threats. These imperfect men, and especially in the case of Lancelot, this hedonistic, selfish, arrogant man goes out, and because he keeps going back out over and over again, the regular citizens have a place to live. They can be safe from the giants, be safe from the witches. And that is, I think, what this cycle of this human civil victory over chaos is something that without America, it would be hard to recognize, because I don't think it's really happened anywhere else. And even now, I think the chaos is still everywhere else. And America is no saint. I mean, we kill more people than the Holocaust every 2 years. But you don't experience that in your day-to-day life. It's like the mass murder of children, the mass murder of unwanted young for convenience is something that, as a haunted specter that is coming around us and that hammer that will come down on us, is not something we experience day to day. So it's easy to say we are in Camelot. And I am not going to fault people for perceiving that.
Yeah, it's always going to be a battle, no matter what time period we are, which there's plenty of write about, plenty of things to see. I'm definitely going to show this podcast to my cousin, who's not a fan of Westerns. He just says he doesn't get it. So I'm definitely going to have to send this over to him so I can turn him into a changed man. So Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you giving me the time to talk about it. I hope this goes out to inspire. And if you don't mind, before we go, I'd like to plug a couple other Christian authors that I think their works are. I think a couple people else in the system who are out active. Some of them have platforms, some of them do not. But the Lars Walker is one. He's a local Minnesotan like myself. And then he writes a lot of more modernist fiction but he is a confessional Lutheran. I believe he's AALC, but I'm not 100% sure. And if he is willing if he corrects me, that's good. And then you got people like Razor Fist, who's much newer. He's in our generation, or my generation, I guess, since I'm older than you. And he's been writing a lot of pulp stuff lately. He recently converted back to the LCMS. I don't know where he was as a kid, but he's become a confessional Lutheran. Ghost of the Badlands is his most recent. It's a comic book that deals with it's basically a wholehearted adaptation of the Shadow into the character of the Shadow into the American West. I recommend Eric July and his Ripperverse, an attempt to build a new superhero setting by a Christian author. I don't know what his exact Christian tradition is, but he is Christian, and it is reflected very heavily in his works. Like I encourage all of you, anybody who's listening, go out and look for a chance to support these authors, because a lot of them are the works are available. They're out there. They are being created, and nobody is there actually looking for them. Ian Wilson is another one. He has a lot of Arthurian stuff. It's because if you aren't going out to kind of cultivate this, you're just waiting on people to tell you what to like. And the last time Christians got something that they should have liked, we rebelled against it because it was Harry Potter, which is a great confession of the Augustinian theology, and intentionally so. And Christians treated it like it was this essay on witchcraft, which is just not accurate at all. And we wasted the shot and we handed it over to pagans who the author absolutely despised right from the beginning. So yeah, no, go out and support those other authors, because whether or not they're interested in being successful, at least their works deserve recognition among people who aren't just part of the authorial niche.